All right, so I was kind of noodling around and I was playing with my favorite camera that I've ever owned. Silly 35mm film camera from the 90s, and it's just a joy. I love using it. And it got me thinking, could I, oh, this is a ridiculous angle. Could I recreate the look from when this camera was made? Like, could I film something and make it look like I shot it on a camcorder in the 90s? And that's what we're doing today. So this camera, like I said, is from the, actually, you know what? Hold on, I'll be right back. Where is it? Yes, got it. This guy is actually the kind of camera that I'm gonna try to recreate with this camera. This is a tiny little handy cam that you can get for like no money online. Probably as expensive as this one. And so what I wanted to do was recreate the look of this camera with this camera. And it's a little more difficult than I thought it was. The thing about doing this is it really is a combination of production and post-production. So you're gonna do a lot of stuff in camera, but you're also gonna do a lot of stuff in the edit, and that is exactly what I did. So first things first, camera settings. You can shoot them whatever resolution you want. I chose 4K, but the main thing that you need to do is make sure that your base time code is either 30p or 60p. After shooting it, I think that 30p is probably the way to go. The reason I want to do this is because camcorders don't shoot at 24p. Or at least they didn't in the 90s. Shooting at 30p recreates that kind of like ultra smooth, handycam, homemade video type of aesthetic that you find with cameras like this. Also, after doing a couple of tests, I noticed that white balance being set to around 3200 lets you get a little bit more of that vintage aesthetic in terms of shooting in daylight, because it, I don't know, it just adds like that kind of characteristic of not necessarily bad video, but it's like clearly not professional, if you know what I mean. Step number 3 actually has to do with how you use the camera physically, like operating it. And I found that if you just kind of don't pay attention to like really good camera moves, it does look a lot more home movie-ish. And that certainly helps the aesthetic that I was going for. How many times have I said aesthetic in this video? The other thing that really helps with recreating this 90s look is having a lens that has a zoom function. Now, I primarily shoot on primes, but I grabbed a little Canon zoom lens that I had on like literally the first camera I ever bought. Canon T2i, by the way. It's kind of crazy to think that 90s is vintage now. It's not, oh, I'm old. Ooh. And then just like kind of a general rule for shooting in this style is just don't worry about being good at using your camera. It kind of works better if you don't do that good of a job, because it just lends itself to the whole homemade aesthetic. There, I said it again. So we're gonna go over to my computer and we're gonna talk about post-production. All right, first things first is basic color correction. So I added correction LUT, and then I did a little bit of tweaking here and there, and that looks like this. Not too great, but again, because we're going for that kind of vintage 90s look, I'm not trying to make it perfect. I'm trying to make it 90s. And so I'm keeping that in mind from the very start. The next thing that I do is local corrections. So these are clip specific color corrections that I do for every single clip, because obviously no clip is exactly the same. And if you want them all to look similar, you gotta adjust each and every one. So that's what looks like this. Now, it's where the fun, weird stuff comes in. And for me, this was a bit of an experiment. So I didn't know if I was 100% gonna get it right, but I think I got close. So now that I have all my colors set for all my clips, I actually put an additional layer of adjustment on top of everything. So these can be more global adjustments to the entire set of clips rather than editing each individual clip, because I have them all kind of relatively where I want them to be. And now I just have to give it an overall style. And so the first thing that I did was I added a whole bunch of noise, like a lot, like that much, which is an absurd amount of noise. I otherwise never would have done this, but because I'm going for a very specific look, that's what makes it okay. Also, just fair warning, if you're adding noise as an effect directly in Premiere Pro, it bogs down your computer like crazy. Just something to keep in mind. Then after I did that, I actually added a layer of opacity that is masked to be a vignette, because I just wanted an effect just on the corners and on the edges of the screen. And those effects are a channel blur and a Gaussian blur. And the reason I wanted to add that was because typically in a lot of 90s footage, you get a lot of color shifting and a lot of sharpness fall off, which is basically when things get blurry around the side. And so I wanted to recreate that. And the two effects that you can do that pretty easily are Gaussian blur for the overall blur, which looks like this, and channel blur, which allows you to adjust the blur settings on your red, green, and blue channels. So you can get that kind of like chromatic split effect thing. It's really easy to go overboard with that, so I recommend exercising discretion. But that looks like this. Now, because I added these effects to an adjustment layer that's on everything, I only have to do all these adjustments once. Downside of that is that it takes a really long time for these effects to render out. So click export and then go get a tea or a coffee or something, because it's gonna take a little minute. The net result is a video that you're gonna see in just a second, but after the video, we're gonna talk about things we could have done better to make it a little bit more authentic. Right, so did the effect actually work? For the most part, I would say yes, but there was an issue that I noticed, and I think it has to do with the gear that I used. And that's because the lenses that I'm using and the sensor that I'm shooting it on, I think just have too much resolution and are too sharp. And it doesn't lend itself to a project like this. So this would be one of those situations where I would caution you to choose wisely what you're shooting on. Alternatively, you could just pop an SD card into one of these things and make that work, because at the end of the day, this is the real thing. This is fake. I guess this is one of those situations where I would say don't fix it in post, but at the same time, if you do have to do it on your computer, rest assured that this method can get you pretty close to what you're looking for. A little bit of tweaking here and there, and I bet you can get it spot on. If you have a better way of doing this, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, because I do experiments like this all the time. And if you have an idea for something you want to see, again, leave it in the comments below. I hope you like this video, and I'll see you next time. Peace.